A medical emergency in space is the stuff of Hollywood scriptwriters. In the dead of night, NASA's live feed, capturing what might in another movie be called an escape pod returning to Mother Earth off the coast of San Diego.
Splashdown of Crew 11. After 167 days in space,
In truth, little was left to chance. A meticulously managed rescue mission after one of the crew on the International Space Station developed a medical issue. The details haven't been made public.
the SpaceX personnel now have the go to approach the spacecraft and begin that recovery process.
Step 1. Tow the so-called Dragon module to the recovery ship waiting nearby. Then, after hoisting it on board, open the hatch.
This is the first breath of fresh air that this crew has gotten in 167 days since their launch back in August.
And the first glimpse of our intrepid space voyagers.
And it looks like our first crew member out of the spacecraft is NASA astronaut Mike Fink.
Mike Fink is one of NASA's most experienced astronauts, but after half a year in microgravity, human beings undergo significant change. The body, the brain, and don't forget the psychological impact of being stuck on a claustrophobic spaceship 250 miles above Earth.
Astronauts Zena Cardman and Mike Fink, Kim Yayui of JAXA, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the medical teams.
This is the first time a crew, this one 2 Americans, a Japanese and a Russian, has been evacuated because of a medical emergency since the ISS was put into orbit in 1998. And NASA say the time they did spend in space was still a big success. The person who was sick, they said, is doing fine.
Obviously, we took this action because it was a serious medical condition, right? You know, in that respect, it was a serious situation. The astronaut in question is fine right now, good spirits, and going through the proper, the proper medical checkouts.
While the highs of space travel can include getting to see the northern lights from above, the lows can be pretty grim. Orbital sickness is a bit like regular travel sickness and is very common. More serious issues like blood clots can usually be managed with medication. But sometimes things get so risky, the mission has to end. In 1976, Soviet cosmonaut Vitaly Zholobov developed severe nausea, probably from contaminated air. Soyuz 21 was terminated after just 49 days. In 1985, cosmonaut Vladimir Vasyutin got a serious prostate infection. Salyut 7 was also aborted. In 2007, NASA's Clayton Anderson went home early for medical reasons that have never been revealed. And in 2013, when Russian Pavel Vinogradov fell ill on the ISS, he was unable to take part in spacewalks, but he stayed his full term on board. We may never know what brought this ISS mission to a premature close, but orbiting Earth is no place to take unnecessary risks with health. The crew chose to play it safe.
Well, I'm joined now by Professor Kevin Fong, who used to work with NASA as a space doctor. Professor Fong, thank you very much indeed for coming along to join us today. Look, I know NASA have said that at the moment they're not saying anything, but have you got any insight into what the medical emergency might have been?
No, I don't. I mean, you can understand why they're trying to keep it all private. There's only 4 of them, and patient confidentiality is as important in space as it is here on Earth. So, no, but only to say that it's not easy to get ill or injured up there. Part of the procedure in space, as on Earth, prevention is better than cure. They select these people very carefully, so they're very fit. And then on the space station itself, you can't fall down the stairs, you can't get run over by a car, no one's going to assault you outside a nightclub. So there's very few things that can happen to you up there. And the consequences of having to evacuate are very serious for the agency, for the future of this mission and all missions. So this isn't something you do casually.
But that said, people must feel unwell pretty regularly. The physiology of being in space, it places some pretty serious demands both on the brain and the body.
Yeah, so people do actually feel unwell very regularly out there in a mild way. So we know what medications are most used up there. And I think last I looked, the most prescribed medications are for sleep and for anti-sickness, because when you first arrive in space, it's very difficult to sleep, and you feel a bit sick because it's a bit of a disorientating environment. We don't tend to see serious illness, and the important thing is there isn't like a Dr. McCoy's sick bay up there. You know, that there isn't always a doctor on staff, and it's less well equipped than the average London ambulance, the space station. So that they aren't expecting serious things to happen. They have contingencies when they do, and they've just enacted one. But broadly, the strategy is about stopping things from happening.
Are there risks of something happening that might cause long-term problems?
So you know, it's a very austere environment. You're out there in the vacuum of space in this sort of tiny artificial bubble of life support. There are potential risks, and potentially very serious risks. The things they used to worry about were decompression sickness. You're in a high pressure space station, and when you go on spacewalks, you're going to a low pressure environment. So it's a little bit like diving in reverse. So that is one of them. There are other things that could be potentially catastrophic up there. An explosive decompression, so something pierces the side of the vehicle and you get a decompression. Fires are a huge worry up there. But as far as I can tell, none of these things has happened. So beyond that, it's very difficult to know, and probably not useful to speculate on what's happened, only to say that you know, because of the knock-on consequences for this mission and all future missions of evacuating in this way, this would not have been done without very, very careful thought, and there would have been a careful consideration amongst many people, many medical professionals at NASA and beyond, as to what the right thing to do is.
So there's some of the kind of more catastrophic potentialities. What about more mundane stuff? I mean, what do you do in space if you get the runs?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I know that that's ever happened, but you know, all of these things. So dealing with medical conditions in space, it's always difficult because none of the conditions you have on Earth exist out there in space. Your patient's floating, you're floating, you have to secure them. You don't have the right kit, you don't have the right power, and you don't have the right expertise immediately to hand. So all of it is problematic, and you don't want to have to do it if you ideally can.
And we've kind of focused, I guess, quite a lot on physical problems. But what about the mental? What about the psychological side? Because that must raise at least as many questions and challenges.
So, I mean, it is a psychologically challenging environment for lots of different reasons. It's very hard work up there. Your schedule is very full. You're very busy. You're in an environment whereby you have abnormal cycles of night and day. So the sun rises and sets every 16 times in a 24-hour period up there. So your sleep is thrown off. But again, these people are screened very carefully. They go through a very careful selection process and then preparation process. And so we have tended not to see problems with psychological issues over the years, you know, despite actually how challenging and potentially threatening the environment is.
And to prepare people for that kind of mission, well, in the immediate kind of weeks before they go and whilst they're on the spacecraft, one assumes they must be pumped full of all kinds of drugs and prophylaxis to stop things from potentially developing that could make the trip really grim.
It's not about pumping them full of drugs. That they like all medicine, you only treat people if they need treating. You know, in terms of psychological protection, you build a mission where they have as many creature comforts as you can afford in the space and the environment that they're in. So one of the things that NASA learned very early was that food is a huge component of your psychological protection if you're in an austere environment like that. And so actually the larder on the space station is surprisingly good, given that they don't have a freezer section and a microwave and all the, you know, they focus hard on that because they know that if you want a crew to perform well, they need to be surrounded by as many creature comforts as you can. Now, these days, they have quite good contact with their family on the ground through calls that are conducted precisely the way we're conducting this one. And so it's a systems approach. This whole thing is about building a system around people to make it as unlikely as possible that something's going to go wrong. And when it does, you have plans that you can trigger. Even if they've never been triggered before, they're very well prepared. And this would have taken a lot of thought and a lot of preparation. And it's really great to see them get back safely today.
So all those assumptions and jokes about beige NASA food, that they're not true?
No, I've eaten quite a lot of their food. It's not bad. I had quite a nice prawn cocktail out there. I mean, it's hard to make because they don't, as I say, they don't have a stove, they don't have a microwave, you don't have the kettle up there because you don't want to have boiling water floating around.
So you could say no cups of tea?
No, not a decent cup of tea. The Italians, I think, did put a cappuccino machine up there.
What if you need a beer?
Yeah, I don't think there's too much beer on the space station.
Professor Fong, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate your help.
No problem.